One of my more popular videos is my video on how to swap out the whole pumpkin of your 350Z so you can go from a 3.3 or a 3.5 rear gear up to a 3.7 or even a 3.9 gear. And what this is going to do is going to give you quicker acceleration at the cost of a little bit of a lower top speed. I go into a lot of detail in that video, but I've also received a ton of questions and comments on that video, so I went through and tried to collect them into similar topics so I could go through and knock out a bunch of questions at one time and just add a little bit more information so people can watch both videos back to back, and hopefully you guys will have a much better idea of what you're doing before going into this project. So first, if you're watching this video and you have not seen the other video I'm talking about, I will go ahead and link it in the top corner, but go ahead, watch that video. You'll pause this, open another window, and then come back and you can watch the rest of this video, and hopefully it will clear everything up and you'll know exactly what you're supposed to do. So number one, and this is just kind of for my sanity, please watch both videos all the way through before you ask questions. I have a ton of questions on the other video where I clearly answered it in the video, and I guess they just stopped halfway through and posted a comment. And while I'm happy to answer those questions, and I answered most of them, if it's really egregious, I'm not going to answer your question. I'm going to ask you to go back and please watch the video. And if you still have a question, then we can talk. It saves me a lot of time, because if I get too many comments, I start to miss things get lost. And I would rather really answer questions that I didn't answer in a video than repeat things that I already posted. Number two, explaining all the different types of diffs. So when you're searching for these on eBay or an online junkyard, Facebook Marketplace, wherever, people are going to use a lot of different terms, and some of them overlap and mean the same thing. So for example, if they say open diff, that is the same thing as non-locking. Those two are interchangeable. If they say LSD, locking, VLSD, all of those are the same thing. It's a viscous limited slip differential is what came from the factory. It is not as good as an aftermarket clutch type or helical differential. So if you want the best possible differential, you can go ahead, save yourself some money and buy an open differential and then swap in an aftermarket unit before you put this in your car. If you're just doing some casual daily driving or you're trying to save some money, the viscous limited slip differential or VLSD will do just fine for you. They're starting to get a little up into years, especially if they had a lot of miles on them. They probably don't work very well anymore. So all those open diffs out there that aren't very expensive, it would be a good option to go ahead and add in an aftermarket diff. One thing to note is research your aftermarket diff. Some of them want you to use an open diff as a base, and some of them want you to use a LSD as a base. It's the stub axles that go in the left and right side of the differential. They are different lengths on the two different differentials, so just research that a little bit. And of course, if you have any questions, you can double check and call those companies before making a purchase. One of the things I get asked about the most often is the pinion flanges. Nissan used two different pinion flanges. They used one, which I have pictured here, which is a circle, and one that is triangular. It's got 3 points on it with 3 different bolts. The circle uses 4 different bolts. The circular 4-bolt flange is used on all manual transmission 350Zs, G37s, 370Zs, G35s. They all use the circular flange if it's a manual. If it is an early automatic car, like an 03, 04, 05, it might have a circular flange, it might have a triangular flange. If the car is newer than that, it most likely has the triangular flange, but unfortunately there is not a hard line in the sand of production date means this pinion flange. So what you're going to have to do is slide underneath the car and confirm yourself before you buy. So just make sure that you have the pinion flange that you're shopping for. I've had a lot of people ask me about swapping over the flanges, and yes, this is something you can do. However, it is a lot more complicated than simply unbolting one part and putting the new one on, because the clearances on these differentials is important, and you need to have the right amount of preload for everything to sit properly. I just don't think it's worth undoing the parts and trying to swap them over on a diff that is already functioning perfectly fine. I think it's a lot better idea to wait and find the differential that matches your car, Another topic is the stub axles. I haven't had anyone ask me about this, and I ran into this personally and I forgot to mention it. Nissan used two different attachment methods between the axles and the stub axles. On some cars, the bolt holes on the stub axles are threaded, and on some cars, they use a bolt and a nut to clamp the two together. Of course, this is a super easy fix. If your car has the threaded stub axles and you buy one that does not have the threads, it has a clean through hole and you need a nut and a bolt, you simply go out to the store, buy longer bolts and some nuts to match it. You're definitely going to want some 12.9 metric hardware. You do not want to go with like an 8.8. You could probably get away with 10.9, but I would spring for the extra money and get some 12.9 grade metric bolts. And of course, the opposite is true. If you have the longer nut and bolt combination and you're switching to a stub axle that's threaded, you'll simply just have to go and buy some shorter bolts in the correct thread pitch. I'm going to be honest with you, and I am sorry, I don't know what that is. I was able to go to Ace Hardware and pick up grade 12.9 metric hardware. That was the right thread pitch, so I don't think it should be too big of an issue, but it's just something to check on your car and check on the differential you buy so you can kind of plan ahead and go ahead and buy those nuts and bolts before you start swapping out the pumpkins. One thing that is a little unfortunate is even though the differential in the G's and the Z's are an R200 differential, and the R200 is used in a bunch of different cars, including the R32, R33, and R34 GTR, the S13, 14, and 15s use it as well. It is a different R200 diff, and they are not interchangeable. There are a lot of subtle differences between the two that just make it impossible and completely impractical to try to swap them between the cars. The stub axles use a different number of bolts to attach to the axles. You have a different number of bolts attaching the rear cover of the diff to the subframe. I believe the carrier bearing for the pinion is actually smaller and not as strong. Unfortunately, you can't swap over the pinion and the ring into a later R200 diff. There's just no compatibility between the two, so even though there are a lot of great gearing options from the 90s, none of those will work in the later G's and Z's. If you find an all-wheel drive differential and it does not list whether it is locking or open, it doesn't matter. All all-wheel drive cars had open differentials. I have never found an LSD in an all-wheel drive car. If they have it listed as an all-wheel drive and it's locking, it is probably listed improperly on one or the other, and I would probably just avoid it. You will not need any sort of speedometer correction or have any issues with wheel speed, because the way the car learns how fast it's going is the sensors on the stub axles. You'll notice there are little rings just inside the stub axles that have little teeth on them, and there are sensors that slide into the rear differential cover, and that's where they bolt on. And those sensors have no idea what gearing is inside the differential or how fast the engine is going. It doesn't matter what gear you're in. All it reads is how fast those rings are spinning, so you can change everything in front of them and it doesn't matter. It will still tell the car the same exact speed. If you change something outside of those rings, like the diameter of your tires or your wheels, and you have a different height overall of that wheel and tire package, that is when you'll start having speedometer issues. This is one I thought I explained pretty well in the first one, but I will just say it again just to make everyone a little bit more at ease. But yes, you can swap the entire pumpkin out of any 350Z, 370Z, G35, or G37 into any other 350Z, G35, G37, 370Z, and they will swap in perfectly. They're 100% interchangeable. The only thing you'll have to worry about is, does your pinion flange match? And like I mentioned before, with the stub axles, are they threaded or is it straight through, depending on what nut and bolt combination you're going to need to use. But they will swap right in. It'll bolt into place. You won't have anything else that you'll have to worry about. So if you have a 370Z that has twin turbos on it and you want a longer differential ratio, you can get a 3.3 out of an automatic and throw it in there from an early 350Z that has a 4-bolt flange, and it'll match up to your manual transmission and it will make launches easier because you won't have as much wheel speed, and vice versa. If you find a 3.9 geared Nismo differential out of a 370Z, you can swap that into an early 350Z that has a 3.5 differential, and everything will work perfectly, no issues. That's the whole beauty of this swap, is you can find that differential, swap it in, and in less than an hour, you have a brand new rear gear ratio. And lastly, I will leave you with this. I have a lot of people who are worried because they haven't been able to find one for as cheap as I did, and it is going to be difficult. This is going to take weeks for you to find a good deal. If you have a bunch of money and you're not worried about it, you can find one for $500 to $600 all day, no problem. You can get one with good miles and the locking differential and in great condition. It's not an issue. But if you want to find one for $250, $300, anything under $400, it's going to take you some time, and you might have to travel, you might have to get it shipped. So this is something that's going to take some time. It's not going to instantly pop up and you're going to find it the first day that you look. If you do, you're very lucky. I searched for a long time to find one for $250, and I'm sorry, but no, I am not going to search for anyone. So I've explained it as much as I can, as much as I'm going to. There's a lot of great charts and information in the first video. I think I go through everything pretty well, but between this video and the previous video, you should be more than well enough equipped to go out there and find a different differential for your Z or G so you can swap the gear ratios cheaply and easily. So of course, if you guys have any questions after all of this, again, please continue to drop those down below. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next week.